Amigara Fault, Uzumaki, Tomie, Soichi, Dissolving Classroom, and even niche titles like The Witch, Weeping Woman Hill, and Censor. I've been working through Junji Ito's entire body of work because I'm a fanboy, I guess. But Black Paradox, after I read it, struck me as completely different, because for the first time I've seen in Junji Ito work, it's a longer narrative with the same characters. Usually Junji Ito stories are maybe a couple chapters at most. The only exception to that I can think of is Uzumaki, but the characters themselves don't really change all that much. They're victims of something external that's happening to them. They're never really the cause of it. And that's where Black Paradox is different. What you may think just ends in a weird, creepy, Junji Ito-esque mystery at the end of chapter 1 turns into a really long and philosophical argument throughout the next 5 chapters. It goes in a direction you'd never expect. In this manga, Junji Ito actually tackles environmentalism and the human condition of wanting to destroy everything around them. In Black Paradox, they aren't victims of something external that targets them. They're actually the ones that cause it. Let's meet our characters. Taburo is a gloomy male, Piton is an aristocratic-looking guy, Marusol is an emo girl, and Barachi is a blonde girl whose hair covers one side of her face. Despite all meeting for the first time, they all load into Piton's car pretty quickly, and Taburo, in the passenger seat, is the first one to ask how they're going to do it. And Piton explains that he brought a hose so that they can suck the exhaust from his car. These 4 characters have met online, and they're going to initiate a group death together. And so that the audience knows what's going on, Taburo suggests they all go down the line and explain why they want to die. And we start with Marusol. As a quick aside, some scanlation teams spell Marusol's name M-A-R-U-S-O-U, Marusol, and others in the English translation go Marisol, like M-A-R-I-S-O-L. I tried looking for the Japanese raws myself because I can read Japanese to a decent amount. I mean, I live in Japan, but I can't find any of the original Japanese online, so I'm just gonna do Marusol because that's probably what it would be if I were to guess. Well, Marusol explains first, and she cites the famous Japanese author Ryunosuke Akutagawa, who, yes, is a real writer who did take his own life. Marusol explains that her reason is similar to his, just a general fear of what's to come in the future. Marusol adds her own little spice on it though, saying that she had a premonition that something really, really bad is going to happen to her own body. If you ever see that in a Junji Ito comic, you know something bad's about to happen. Taburo goes next, saying that he started to see his own doppelganger everywhere he goes, staring at him like he's going to kill him. Taburo says that he wants to go out on his own terms before the doppelganger can get him. Piton is our next storyteller, and he tells us that he works at a university where they've made the best robot anyone has ever seen, and they modeled it after Piton. This robot, Piton thinks, has started to become even better than the original. And Piton lately has started to feel like an old iPhone. He feels very obsolete, like he should die before the robot makes its debut to the public so that he can make room for the next technological advancement. Barachi is next, and she claims that her mirror reflection is growing sentient and seems out to get her. In addition, Barachi on the side of her face has this weird life form or something growing out of it. Later on in the comic, we start to refer to this as a birthmark. But here in this panel, we can see bits of flesh growing from it as well. Taburo says that he supposes the theme of tonight's event is another version of myself, which is odd because that includes everyone except Marusol. Her version of why she wants to pass away doesn't necessarily have another version of her. She glances out the window and notices a car speeding by her. In the back seat, she sees Barachi in a separate car. She panics and tells the men in the front seat, but they tell her she must just be getting freaked out due to the nature of what they're going to be doing here today. Barachi beside her in the back seat also calls her an idiot. Maruso tries to gaslight herself in saying that she must be seeing things until she looks up at the rearview mirror and notices that the Barachi sitting next to her doesn't have a reflection. When Piton parks the car in the woods in the location where they're going to do the deed, Taburo pulls away Maruso for a moment to tell her that he's noticed something really weird about Piton. He whispers so that nobody around them can hear that he swears whenever Piton moves, he can hear whirring sounds and motors inside of him. Maruso whispers back that she hasn't seen anything weird about Piton, but she did notice something about Barachi. She pulls out a pocket mirror and shines it in Barachi's direction, showing Taburo that she doesn't have a reflection. Taburo whispers that they should try to get out of there while they still can. What initially starts as a creeping away later turns into a full-on sprint when Piton and Barachi start chasing after them. Maruso trips and throws a rock at Barachi, who shatters like glass. Piton is able to pin down Taburo and stabs him with a box cutter, but Taburo doesn't seem normal either. Like a balloon, he puffs into a burst of black smoke. It turns out that this Taburo wasn't the real one either. He was the doppelganger. Maruso uses the robot Piton's confusion and runs away as fast as she can before stumbling upon a car. She starts banging on the car and looks through the window to see the original three laying down inhaling exhaust. The original Piton sees the robot version, which spooks the robot before it runs away into the forest. The three originals have no idea who Maruso is, and when she explains, they tell her that she thought she just got cold feet and didn't show up at the original meeting spot. The four of them decide to postpone their deaths for another day after that. On their second attempt, they planned on using sleeping pills, but they all soon discovered that they got cold feet because they didn't want to be the only one to die. They felt that if they were the one to actually take the medicine, that they would look like a fool in some way. That is, except for Piton, who actually went through with it. Just as Taburo and Barachi are about to join Piton in the afterlife, Piton starts jerking and groaning as if he's come back from the dead. He turns over from his back onto his stomach before gagging and throwing up a large sphere onto the grass. Obviously he's in pain, so Taburo goes over and tries to comfort Piton as best as he can, but Piton can't stop talking about a beautiful, dazzling world that he saw. Barachi picks up the sphere and says that it reminds her of some kind of black opal. Maruso asks why she knows that, and Barachi says that she used to work in jewelry. In fact, she's so curious about the sphere that she wants to postpone everyone's death again until she can properly identify it. Everyone again agrees to postpone for a little bit longer. Barachi is later seen at home sitting on her couch staring into the sphere for a prolonged period of time until she sees a vision. Inside of the sphere, she sees a large endless chasm filled with spears as far as anybody can see. She panics and drops it onto the ground, where a lot of smoke or maybe light starts emitting from it in the shape of a face. Sometime soon after, Piton decides to go to the doctor because he's having trouble. Maruso actually works at this doctor's office, but it doesn't seem like Piton recognizes her when she's in her nurse's outfit. The doctor shoves a tube down his throat into his stomach and starts doing an examination. Everything looks normal until he gets down to the section of the stomach called the pylorus. When he sees Piton's pylorus, he drops to the floor and starts pointing and screaming that there's something wrong before scrambling out of the room. Piton yanks the tube from his own stomach and leaves the hospital. Side note, I figured you might want this diagram because I had no idea what the pylorus was. It's the bottom part of your stomach where the food goes from the stomach into the rest of your digestive system so that, it can get turned into poopy caca. In Japanese, the word for pylorus is yumon, which uses the words for spirit like yure and mon for gate. So the pylorus, the bottom of your stomach in Japanese, literally translates to spirit gate, which is hilarious because that means your poo-poo passes through the spirit gate before you poopy it out. So it looks like this transitional organ in Piton has something horribly wrong with it. The group of four meet again in a car, where Barachi informs them that she had the sphere looked at by a professional. She says that it's a new kind of mineral that's never been seen before. If they put it onto the market, especially because it's so beautiful, there's no telling how much money they could make. Barachi whispers to herself that if she had a lot of money, she could maybe get cosmetic surgery and heal the birthmark on the side of her face. Meaning that now that since the reflection demon is gone, she would have no reason to end her own life. Maruso interjects and says that out of everyone, Piton should be the one to have it since it came from inside of him. Now that's nice and all, but Piton says it's okay because he opens a duffel bag filled with all of these jewels that he's just been vomiting up after his doctor's visit. Barachi tells us something here that's very important about these minerals. Since they're coming from Piton's spirit door, it's possible that these balls are manifestations of spirits themselves that are encased inside. These aren't minerals, they're human souls. Piton suddenly begins to inflate from the inside before he vomits out more and more and more of these spheres. His stomach grows and stretches in a manner that shouldn't be possible, and the rest of them start to panic. Taburo climbs into the driver's seat, hoping to be able to drive him to the hospital, but they're too late. While they're on the way, Piton's stomach explodes in the car. The next chapter shows that one of these spheres was sent to a popular vlogger so that he could start to rally up attention because Barachi plans to put it on the market. Along with Taburo's help, he's also complicit in this. They've finally given the mineral a name, Paradoxical Night. A bit long if you ask me. Maruso, Barachi, and Taburo meet up, where Maruso is very, very unhappy with how they're planning on starting to sell these things. She thinks they're starting to be very, very, very greedy. After all, their friend, I guess he's a friend, Piton, exploded in the car, and they don't seem to be fazed about it at all. All they seem to be focused on is making money. We learned that after Piton exploded, Taburo and Barachi clambered out of the car to be able to collect as many of the spheres as they could, rather than drive him any further. Maruso is the one who climbed into the driver's seat and drove Piton the rest of the way to the hospital. The only hospital she could think of, though, was the one that she worked at, and being too embarrassed to be able to tell the doctor that there was something wrong, after all, how do you explain something like that, she left Piton in the parking lot with the driver's door open, hoping that somebody would investigate and find him inside. Barachi asks if she knows where Piton is and even calls the hospital herself to try to figure it out, but it's clear she's only interested in finding Piton so that she can see if the door in his stomach is still open so that she can keep getting more paradoxical nights. Maruso is not interested in helping at all. Taburo and Barachi go back to the location where Piton's stomach exploded, hoping to find some more of the paradoxical night gems in the grass. Taburo actually finds one and he puts it in his jacket pocket rather than telling Barachi. Barachi locates a body and thinks that it's Piton at first, but upon closer inspection between her and Taburo, they find that it's actually the Piton robot from chapter 1. Taburo and Barachi drag the Piton robot back to Barachi's apartment as she has a meeting with a businessman about selling the paradoxical nights on the market. He informs Barachi that selling paradoxical nights would be super, super, super profitable only if they could cut into it to add it as things like on rings or necklaces or something. But that proves to be a problem because, as he estimates, paradoxical nights are actually harder than diamonds, meaning very, very, very difficult to cut. After the businessman leaves, Taburo says that he wants to test how hard the paradoxical night actually is. He grabs a hammer, pulls out the one that he took earlier from his jacket, and strikes it. When he does, tons and tons of different souls begin to emerge from here, getting stuck on the walls and the carpet, and even on Taburo and Barachi themselves. Barachi actually passes out for a second before waking up, saying that she saw flashbacks of lives before her from many, many different periods of time. The robot Piton in the other room actually seems to be working now. He gets up and walks into the living room and almost attacks Taburo and Barachi before becoming fixated on the jewel that Taburo struck with the hammer. Taburo notes that the jewel itself is actually quite dimmer now, but Piton is still interested in it. Meanwhile, the idol influencer that was trying to promote the paradoxical night now is doing it in front of a bunch of different people. He wants to try to shatter it to give little bits and pieces of the jewel to everybody in the audience. So, like the smart man he is, he takes out a gun and tries to shoot it. With that amount of force applied to it, the explosion that this paradoxical night gives off is akin to something like a hydrogen bomb, and it explodes the entire talk show area that he's on. Everyone in the audience is incinerated instantly, and nobody survives the event. So it seems like the more force you put on one of these objects, the bigger explosion it has, or the more energy is expelled from it. And we can guess that the energy expelled from it went into the Piton robot of some kind, and that's why he can get up and walk around now. In the next chapter, we see Barachi visiting a doctor, Dr. Suka, to try to get a reading on how she can possibly fix all of the markings on her face now that she started to earn a lot more money from selling the paradoxical nights. In the middle of her consultation, we see a lot of different patients getting rushed into the hospital with all of these weird burn marks all over their bodies. She recognizes them as the same kind of weird burn marks that affixed themselves onto Taburo when he struck the paradoxical night with a hammer. So she knows that they're being caused by the gem. The Piton robot is still moving even days later, although the Piton robot seems for some reason to just constantly want to off itself, I guess is a vague way to put it. Barachi gets a call from the businessman that they had a meeting with, saying that the police are starting to consider the paradoxical nights as terrorist items. They actually want to interrogate Barachi on how she got them. Her and Taburo begin to make preparations to skip town to evade the police. Meanwhile, Maruso meets with her boss, the same doctor trying to do Barachi's treatment, at a local restaurant. Maruso is convinced to go to the doctor's villa in the countryside, and Taburo and Barachi spot her on the way there and decide to follow her. In his villa, Maruso discovers a large amount of these paradoxical nights in the doctor's basement. She's confused and asks him why these are here and where did he get them, and we learn that this doctor, Dr. Suka, actually found Piton in the back of the car when Maruso left it in the parking lot of the hospital. The doctor actually took Piton's stomach organ from his body because his body was technically still alive even though his brain had died at that point. He began to cultivate any cells that were still alive in the stomach, trying to grow them bigger and bigger and bigger until he's made what is now a horribly disgusting swimming pool size Lorax. Now, a person can go back and forth into the spirit world with their entire body. At the same time, Barachi bursts into the villa from the front door, screaming for Dr. Suka to help her. It seems like paradoxical nights are now coming out of her face via the birthmark that she normally has covered up. Maruso, upon seeing this, faints. When she wakes up, she's tied to a table and sees Barachi, who has now had a face transplant of some kind. Her birthmark has now been cut off, and it's now being cultivated in a petri dish by Dr. Suka as well. Maruso, as she's tied up, is starting to have horrible premonitions of the future again. Dr. Suka begins to experiment with Piton's stomach in the swimming pool, sending somebody in an astronaut suit to go investigate. Initially, it seems to go well. They tie a rope to him and allow him to descend, but when it's time to pull him back up, they see that he is completely incinerated and dissolved in the rope itself, leaving nothing but slime, sludge, and skin behind. They decide to use the Piton robot, which surprisingly can come and go without problems. Therefore, Piton begins to be used by Dr. Suka to continue to collect paradoxical nights from the spirit world. Barachi and Dr. Suka begin to get intimate, and Taburo decides that he's sick of being confined by the villa. He plans to leave, saying goodbye to Piton, and goes to say goodbye to Maruso, who is still tied up, by the way, but Maruso is not having a good time at all. She looks horribly disheveled and tells Taburo that something bad is going to happen, and it's going to happen very, very, very soon. Taburo is weirded out by this, doesn't help Maruso despite her being tied up, and just leaves the villa. But he notices that he's starting to see his doppelganger again. Dr. Suka invites a large amount of university professors and businessmen to come watch a presentation he's put together in the swimming pool area. He sends Robot Piton down to go collect some paradoxical nights for everyone to view, and he does it successfully. He also sends down, however, a robot version of Barachi in the birthmark that she has that has now been cultivated large enough to send people through, but the robot Barachi doesn't make it back. So why is Piton's robot working, but Barachi's robot isn't? Dr. Suka creeps down to the basement at night to Maruso and reveals to her that he wants to open up as many doors to the spirit realm as possible. In his mind, there are 4 doors possible. Piton is one, Barachi's face is another one, and that only leaves 2 left. One somewhere in Maruso, and another one in Taburo. He kisses Maruso, probably in some weird attempt at manipulation, but Barachi witnesses this and throws a fit of jealousy. She grabs a bunch of gasoline, pours it all over the birthmark that Dr. Suka has cultivated to be such a large size, and tries to burn it down. Before she can light the match though, Dr. Suka pushes her into her own face, and she falls into the spirit realm. A few days later, he tries to send Piton down into Barachi's face, but he completely declines. Instead, he tries to shove a camera down there to try to experiment with what can and can't go down there, and he sees the figure of Barachi swimming or flying very elegantly through that space. She comes back up, bringing one of the paradoxical knights with her. It seems that Barachi can now move freely in her own face. From there, the doctor does a brain scan on Maruso, who discovers that there's a tumor growing in her brain. He forces her to get a surgery to cut it out and begins cultivating that as well. This gets rid of Maruso's horrible premonitions, and she doesn't seem scared anymore. Taburo's door is actually his shadow, because his shadow starts becoming this weird metaphor for the doppelganger itself, something that's always following near him. So now Taburo's shadow is his own door that only he can fit inside. With all 4 of them now being able to come and go freely from the spirit realm, all of their personalities completely change. They seem to be completely not worried about anything and very neutral towards humans in general, as if they've matured in some kind of weird existential spiritual way. After the brain surgery, Maruso starts to have complete visions of the future whenever she wants to have them. She can just take a peek into what's going to happen to humanity itself. In the future, Maruso sees the complete destruction of the human race itself by their own hand. Soon, people discover the sheer amount of energy released by paradoxical nights, and they start using it for things like to power their cars or their homes. In fact, because of the amount of energy released by only one, why burn any coal at all? Every single society should be using the paradoxical nights at this point. So that kind of imposing onto other societies makes paradoxical nights run out even faster. Even though you can use it for decades on end, it's still a finite resource. The population of humans starts to go down because once you start using souls as a resource, people can't give birth anymore. So in the future, Maruso sees the human race using them until there's no souls left to use. Taburo and Barachi are actually quite worried what that means for their own souls, but Maruso tells them not to worry. If they're so afraid, they could just find their own soul in the sea of souls that they have and protect it. In fact, the Piton robot has already done this. If you remember earlier, the Piton robot found one specific soul that he was very fixated on. It turns out that that was his own soul, and the only way the robot was capable of traveling back and forth from the spirit realm is because that soul, when Taburo struck it, went a little bit inside of the Piton robot. And that's why Barachi's robot didn't work. It's because it wasn't infused with her own soul. Maruso tells them that once they find their own soul, they'll know, because they'll feel a special kind of connection with it. That promise seems to put Barachi and Taburo at least relatively at ease. Dr. Suka opens the door and tells them that today is going to be another day of traveling back and forth to get more paradoxical nights, and none of the four seem to have any problem with that, despite knowing that these actions are what leads to the direct eradication of humanity. So this manga itself, I think, is actually very interesting in the way that it does horror. The horror isn't an external threat like these weird machines that are coming from the water, like in Geo, or any kind of spiral curse like in Uzumaki. The horror is the already very real fact that humanity's own greed is what is going to lead to their destruction. Black Paradox isn't just a normal Junji Ito comic, it's Junji Ito's version of the Lorax. Even at the very end of the comic, Taburo and Barachi think, as long as I protect myself, I'm okay. I am all that I need, and to hell with anybody else. This is why I call it Junji Ito's most pessimistic manga. Everywhere else, there's some kind of way you could possibly escape the supernatural forces because we don't really know how they work. Half the time, the person just goes back to society, like at the end of Weeping Woman Hill, where he has to sacrifice his wife, but he turns out okay. But here, everyone will become a victim at some point, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. So what do you guys think of this manga? Let me know in the comments below, subscribe for more, and let me know what you would like me to talk about next. I talk about Korean manhwa, Japanese manga. I've started to think about maybe I'll do some anime series reviews, like overall, and talk about each episode and like the overarching themes of stuff. I find that stuff really interesting. That would be a lot of work though. I mean, it would be worth it, but I'm not sure. Let me know. But yeah, feel free to let me know what you think of Junji Ito's The Lorax. I think that's so crazy. Okay, bye bye.